Okay, thank you very much for joining us today. We're joined by Dan Orlowitz, who's a Tokyo-based sports journalist, and we'll be commenting on Brighton's two friendlies that they've just arranged in Tokyo ahead of the next Premier League season, where they'll be up against J1 League sides Kashima Antlers on Wednesday, the 24th of July, before facing Tokyo Verdy on Sunday, the 28th of July. And both games will be at the 68,000 capacity National Stadium in Tokyo. So Dan, thanks very much for joining us. What can Brighton fans expect from their first ever trip to Japan and from Tokyo?
Darren, thanks for having me on. It's going to be, I should hope, a very enjoyable experience for any Brighton fans who are making the trip. The club certainly has a lot of fans in Japan and in Asia. Obviously, there's a lot of English and British expats who live here, work here for whatever reason, and quite a number who are very attached to Brighton. And I know quite a few who have gotten a lot of recognition. They say they're from Brighton, and they go, "Oh, Mitoma." So it really does show how much of an impact Mitoma has made at the club and in Japan in terms of raising the club's recognition. They're going to be friendlies, so obviously the level of play, it's the middle of the summer. Japanese summers get very hot, very humid, so anyone who's making the trip, I will say, be cautious and be aware of that. But the fans are second to none. The National Stadium is magnificent when it's packed, which hopefully the organizers will be putting a lot of work into over these next 2 months or so. And it'll be eye-opening, I think, for anyone who comes over. And I think they're going to get a chance to see how big Brighton's fandom in Japan has grown over these last 2 years, really.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a great experience for the fans by the sounds of it. Can you give us a feel for sort of Mitoma's profile in Japan? How popular is he? Obviously, he's a key player for the national team. Is he? You get the sort of feeling there's so many more Japanese fans around the Amex Stadium now when you go to the match days. Does that correspond in Tokyo as well? Is he quite big over there?
Absolutely. I believe Brighton, it's been about a year since Brighton opened their official Japanese language Twitter or X account, if you will, and they have 86 or so thousand followers.
Oh, wow.
One of the top European clubs in Japan in terms of social media presences. He's put the club on the map, and definitely a star for the national team, a star as far as the J League is concerned, even though he only played in the J League for a season and a half, and that was during the pandemic. I always like to say one of the great tragedies of the pandemic in terms of football here was that so few fans got to see him play in the stadium because obviously attendances were capped at 5,000 for most of the 2020 season. I consider myself very fortunate to have gotten to watch him grow and evolve into the player that you see today. And arguably, he was very much robbed of the MVP award that season. Just a massive player for both club and country these days. Certainly in a national team that hasn't quite settled on who the star is, he is one of the candidates. His exploits at the World Cup, goes without saying, are massive. That 1 millimeter made all the difference against Spain. And yeah, as you've seen around the Amex Stadium, he's bringing fans out, and that's not a cheap trip these days, considering how weak the yen is. So you have to be very dedicated to make that journey, and certainly he inspires that in fans here.
Yeah, he's absolute when he's on his form. Like, obviously he's sustained this lower back injury in the last stages of the season, but prior to that, he's absolutely electric. When he's one of the few players that you can say when he gets the ball, the whole crowd, they're anticipating. They're on. He's one of those players that get the crowd on their feet. To do that at the highest level in the Premier League, was that potential evident when he was at Kawasaki Frontale?
Absolutely. He came as a rookie into that 2020 squad, and even just coming off the bench as a super sub, essentially, um, Kawasaki, that 2020 Kawasaki squad was arguably one of the strongest top to bottom that the league has ever seen, just in terms of the quality that they had at the depth that they had. And even in a squad that good, he stood out. Whenever
Yeah,
he got the ball, you knew that he was capable of doing something incredible, not just scoring goals, but also key passes, making assists, setting up chances. And you knew that it was never a question of if Europe, but it was a question of when Europe. And
yeah, yeah.
it was honestly no surprise that he's ascended to this level.
Yeah, yeah. And how is it sort of on the news now? Are his games sort of covered on the news, on mainstream media in Japan?
Yes, anytime a Japanese player does anything in the Premier League, you see it in the headlines, in the little the info displays on the trains where they'll show sort of the highlights, or not the highlights, but photos and sort of headlines from whatever happened over the weekend. And of course, if
Yeah,
Mitoma plays, you're going to see him at some point. Very prominent in advertising related to the national team. Of course, Brighton is becoming more of a draw for sponsors here as well. And he's out there. Certainly one of the most visible Japanese players today.
yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully he's fit in time. He mentioned that he is working towards being fit for the new season with the eye definitely playing these two games against Kashima Antlers and Tokyo Verdy. What can they expect to face against these teams, Dan? Are they how are they what sort of tests are Brighton going to get against them?
So the Kashima game is going to be probably the tougher of the two of the two friendlies. They're very much sort of I hesitate to say rebound because they did fairly well last season, but they're under Ranko Popovic this year, the new manager, and he's got them in third place. Very tough. Uh, just a very tough squad. The most accomplished in Japanese football. They've won the most titles, and I'm talking about both major titles domestically, and if you include their ACL triumph in 2018. Um, I expect that you've got players in there like especially Yuma Suzuki, who for a while was one of Japan's brightest talents at striker, and he had some personality conflicts that kept him from the national team, which is sort of a shame because he's been one of the best strikers that Japan has produced in the last decade. Verdy are the interesting choice. They are newly promoted this season, an original 10 club like Kashima, one of the co-founders of the J League, but they've been in the second division since the end of the 2018 season. So for them to land this friendly, I think that the league or I shouldn't say the league because they're not organizing this game, but the sponsors are maybe banking on some nostalgia there.
Yeah, yeah,
Marketing wise, Verdi are actually doing a pretty good job this season of returning to the J1, and they're holding their own. They have a flair for the dramatic so far this season. I believe 10 or 11 of their games, and they're 15 games in, 10 or 11 of their results have been determined in the last 5 minutes of play.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Basically, from the
Yeah.
85th minute on, they've had a total of 14 goals scored.
Oh, wow.
And both for and against. So
Yeah.
never
So
a
don't
dull
leave early.
moment.
Yeah.
Never a
Yeah.
dull moment. Only 3 wins so far, which is the problem, but only 3 losses, just 9 draws, and they've all been just the most thrilling games you can imagine. So I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if this game is going to be like that, but it'll be interesting. And like I said, when the national stadium does have the track, it's not the best stadium that Japan has to offer, but when it's packed, it is an incredible atmosphere.
Generates a good atmosphere. Yeah.
We saw that last year with the Bayern and Manchester City friendlies, and you would hope that, especially with the draw of Mitoma, there's going to be a lot of fans who are going to come out to see that, and it'll be an interesting mix.
Yeah, yeah. Why do you think they didn't have a friendly against his former team, Kawasaki Frontale? That would have been a nice one, wouldn't it, for Mitoma to go back to his hometown club?
Yeah, it would have been, and to be honest, the number of European clubs we have coming to Japan this year who aren't playing the match that we sort of predicted is pretty high. You have Tottenham coming, but they are playing Vissel Kobe, who won the J1 last year, rather than Ange Postecoglou's former team, Yokohama F. Marinos. You have now Brighton coming and not playing Kawasaki. Stuttgart are coming, and of course Genki Harajukuchi is leaving, but Hiroki Ito isn't going to be facing off against Jibilo Iwata. So a lot of weird matchmaking happening here. I think that sort of comes down to who the sponsors are, who is organizing these games. The J League is doing some, but not all, and also how clubs are prioritizing their summer breaks. And you do have to look at Kawasaki's, from the sort of load bearing perspective. They will have the Asian Champions League to contest from September, so maybe they've made it. Maybe their club ultimately made the decision to take that time to help their players recover. But to my knowledge, they were in the running for this game. So it was somewhat of a surprise to see that they didn't land it, and I'm sure Kawasaki's fans will be very disappointed that they didn't land it.
Yeah. Well, no, it'd been a great story to have Mitoma going back there. But there's this sort of perception that Brighton seemed to pluck him from out of nowhere. But obviously, he was doing great things for Kawasaki at the time. Are there any other players that you think in the Japanese league that you think could be ready to make that next step that perhaps even Brighton should be keeping their eye on?
I mean, there's always J-leaguers who are on the verge of a big move. I think that the time of Japanese players being sort of these diamonds in the rough that nobody saw coming, that's sort of over. I think that you look at how there's always, every off season you have 5 to 10 Japanese players who are going to Europe. They're going to Belgium. They're going to Portugal. They're going to all sorts of clubs and signing on and making an impact, and then moving on to bigger clubs. The biggest surprise of this summer friendly season is that FC Tokyo don't have anyone lined up as sort of the biggest club in the capital, and a club that is capable of drawing a very large crowd, and a club that's featuring a lot of national team and Olympic team players. And maybe that's one reason why it didn't work out, because a number of their players, including Kuryamatsuki, goalkeeper, or Kuryamatsuki is a midfielder, but Brandon Taishinozawa, the goalkeeper, Kashifang Nagande, defender, they're all potentially going to be playing in Paris at the Olympics. So maybe that's sort of why it didn't work out, is that Tokyo aren't expecting to have that star power available for these games. But you turn on any J League game, and there's someone you should be paying attention to. And I think that's the strength that this league has, is that it's producing so many young, talented players who are ready for Europe. Maybe not the Premier League immediately, but you watch some of these players, and within a year or two, you're going to see them in action. And as I've told other outlets before, the World Cup is in 2 years, and I think it's very possible that Japan will field a squad of all Europe-based players. I think that's the depth of that the player pool has right now.
Well, Mitoma's certainly leading the way, and hopefully, he can recover in time to play a big part in these games coming up. But away from the football, Dan, what should Brighton fans say if they're heading to the football? Then after the game, is there any sort of parts of the city that they should perhaps look around, or what? Should look to do?
It's all good. I think that especially these days, we're experiencing a tourism boom, the likes of which Japan has not experienced until now. Even in the pre-pandemic peak of 2019, the National Stadium is basically a 5-minute train ride from Shinjuku, which is one of the big nightlife and sort of entertainment districts.
Yeah.
You have, saying, well, where should you go in Tokyo is like saying where should you go in London or New York City.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
It's just it is not just a city, it is in fact designated a metropolis by the government. Sort of you go to Tokyo Tower or Skytree and you look out and just all the light touches is Tokyo. And I think that the fans who make the trip, I hope that they'll, discover some gems of their own. I'm sure that they're gonna, I'll be seeing some blue and white stripes in July, and I would say the biggest suggestion I can say is just be respectful of the local customs, be adventurous, be curious. Don't be afraid to go off the beaten path and go into a restaurant that doesn't have English signage. You're gonna find
Sure. Yeah.
you're gonna find the best meals of your life. You're gonna find amazing culture and history and beauty, and to go outside Tokyo. You've got 3 or 4 days between those friendlies. Go out, experience all Japan has to offer,
Yeah. Yeah.
and get out there.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a great experience. I was pleased when it came through because there was so much talk that it might happen, and then once the confirmation came through, it's so the fans that can afford to sort of travel over there, I think they're going to have a great experience, in Tokyo and watching some good football as well. But no, thanks again for joining us, Dan. That was some great insight, and we look forward to the games over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Can't wait to. Hopefully, you'll be making it out, or it's. I look forward to meeting all the Brighton media at the National Stadium.
That would be great.